So after deciding to go back in time for the previous game and fill out the story of Big Boss, kind of, what was Kojima and team going to do for the next title? Well, they did have this one other character that had quite a significant portion of his story missing from the overall franchise. Sure, we'd technically been told at least parts of it in MGS4, but we didn't really get any details and we certainly didn't see any of it. I am of course talking about Raiden and how he went from the seemingly inexperienced rookie nobody of MGS2 to the badass blade-wielding flip-kicking cyborg ninja of MGS4. This seems like it would make for a perfect setting and story for a new Metal Gear game, so it's no wonder that it's what Kojima and team decided to go for. Finally, we'd all get to see exactly what happened to Raiden and what he went through between MGS2 and 4. Or would we? You see, the initial idea might have been to present this section of the overall saga, but the final product ended up being something quite a bit different, and by different I mean astonishingly misguided and nonsensical. Oh, you'll find out. Welcome back to my Metal Gear Retrospective. We'd better just start with one of the biggest problems with this game right away, the storyline and setting. Like I said, this was supposed to be the story of what Raiden went through between MGS2 and 4, and how he ended up as a cyborg ninja. Hell, it's what the bloody title is seemingly referring to. Raiden rising from the grunt he was to a confident badass cyborg ninja who'd be more than capable of seeking out his... Revengeance. Yeah, that always was a weird choice of words, wasn't it? Either way, the title does at least make some semblance of sense with that setting in mind, but that's not what we ended up getting. No, instead, this game is actually set a little bit later than that. In fact, it's set after the events of MGS4. What? Seriously, how does this make any sense? Sure, I suppose it's possible to set a game in this period, but to make a game featuring Raiden in this setting? Have you completely forgotten how MGS4 ended? Oh, you have? Well, allow me to refresh your memory then. If you recall, Raiden spent most of MGS4 kind of cursing his own existence and honestly being kind of emo, but as events unfolded and he eventually learned that his wife had actually not abandoned him or lost their child, that this was all a ruse to protect them all, Raiden realized just how much he still had to live for and how futile it would be to keep running away from his past and fight in endless battles. I mean, just look at his final scene of the game.
I'm done running.
Yeah, that totally seems like someone who would jump right back into the battlefield, doesn't it? Fine, I suppose there could be reasons he'd go back, but no, they do not give him nearly a good enough reason to do so. As a matter of fact, I'm hard-pressed to remember why he's back in action at all. No, really, they do an absolutely terrible job of setting up or explaining almost anything in this game, least of all Raiden's reasons for seemingly abandoning his family yet again in favor of returning to fight for some faceless PMC or some such. Well, he does need to make a living. Yeah, but not at the cost of his entire development as a character, you tool! It's not like this was a necessary change either. Okay, so Kojima decided to hand over most of the production of the game to Platinum, the people who made Bayonetta and Vanquish, as his own team couldn't quite work out how to make the swordplay and cutting mechanics work like they wanted, but why did the storyline need to change? Sure, Kojima didn't want to restrain Platinum, but why not? Just let them deal with the mechanics and you deal with the story. Why would that be an issue? Whatever the case, that is ultimately what somehow happened. Platinum Games basically took over all production and decided that the original storyline and setting wasn't good enough for their mechanics, so they instead changed it to this nonsensical mess. How respectful! No, Kojima and co aren't without blame here either, they greenlit this thing after all, but the sheer gall of even suggesting that the original storyline just wasn't good enough is quite the piss take, I have to say. Let's not jump to conclusions though. Maybe Platinum's new storyline does work much better. Maybe they actually came up with something truly brilliant. So tell me, how does the game start?
Are you serious? Is she serious?
No, come on, where's the punchline? This can't be how the game actually starts. It just can't. There's just no way you can seriously be starting off the game by having Raiden fighting off a Metal Gear Ray single-handedly. A bastarding Metal Gear Ray! You know, the thing both Raiden and Snake struggled to and technically didn't defeat in MGS2? You're really kicking things off with Raiden now able to toss these things around like the bloody puppets? No, that's definitely not laughable. So yeah, that's the sort of thing we're in for, folks. A game so consumed by being awesome, badass, and cool that they essentially make the protagonist an unstoppable, all-powerful, indestructible, all but perfect being in the first couple of minutes. It's one thing to potentially build up to something like this, but when you start off flying over the top of even the highest mountain, you can't really reach a peak later without it seeming like a bit of a drop. Because it is! Oh, and before you start thinking that this is just a setup of sorts, no. This is a constant thing with this game, as it never relents. It never really calms down. Everything is always over the top and ridiculous to the point of absurdity. Sure, a bit of that at times can definitely be fun, but here it just comes across as shallow and insecure. It's like they're afraid to ever let anything get a chance to breathe, because then people might realize just how ludicrous all of this actually is. It's basically trying to do this.
Diggly 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 diggly.
You'll see what I mean eventually, but let's just start going through this thing for now. As stated, the game takes place sometime after MGS4, as Raiden is now apparently working for some PMC named Maverick. Who exactly they are, how Raiden met any of them, or even what their general personalities are is seemingly not that important though, as we're never really told any of that. All I remember about them is that one is a gruff Russian type, one's a black guy, and one has big boobs. What more do you need, right? Either way, it seems Maverick has sent Raiden to act as a bodyguard for some African prime minister or some such, but he doesn't exactly do a stellar job of protecting him. You see, while they're driving to someplace, their motorcade is suddenly ambushed and the prime minister is kidnapped. Raiden leaps into action, slicing his way through the terrorist forces, including the aforementioned Ray, and eventually corners one of the assailants. Before he can actually do anything though, the Prime Minister is killed right in front of him by a man apparently called Sundowner, but that I personally like to refer to as Creeperface because, well, look at him. In fact, look at both of these guys. They both pull that weird misshapen grin at some point. Is it just their group's trademark or something? In any case, after the Prime Minister is all cut up, Raiden tries to take out the man blocking his path, a man going by the name Jetstream Sam, but he ultimately fails as both he and the other baddies get away relatively easily. In other words, quite a successful mission for Raiden indeed. It's okay though, because no one really seems to care that Raiden absolutely fails to complete even one single aspect of the job he was sent to do, as he's pretty much immediately sent out on another one. Yup, no point in reflecting on what went wrong or scrutinizing Raiden's skills or anything like that. Let's just get back out there and forget all about that pesky Prime Minister whom we completely failed to protect from getting eviscerated. Why would anyone care about that? Maverick certainly doesn't, as instead of even giving Raiden a stern word, they send him to, I think, Russia. It seems there's some military mucky-muck or whatever called Dolzaev who is trying to do something bad, and he's apparently working with the same group that killed the African Prime Minister, which supposedly explains why Raiden's the one going after him. I guess. Before he can get his hands on Dolzaev himself though, Raiden first runs into Mistral, another member of that group from Africa. She's apparently operating as Dolzaev's right-hand woman, which I suppose must be heaven for her as she seemingly has quite a serious arm fetish. Even with all these extra helping hands though, Raiden eventually manages to cut Mistral down to size, as I suppose she just didn't bear enough arms. Okay, I'll stop. While he does manage to stop Mistral though, it seems Dolzaev isn't willing to go quite so peacefully as he contacts Raiden after witnessing their battle. He does seem to realize how outmatched he is though, as he only spouts some generic threats for a moment, before activating some sort of explosive and blowing both himself and some oil refinery or plant or some such to smithereens. Yet another tick in the successful mission book, eh Raiden? That does seem to be Maverick's sentiments at least, as they once again send Raiden out on another mission without so much as a hint of hesitation. This time he's sent to Mexico, and remember that scene I showed at the end of my Peace Walker video? Well, here's where we get the context for that one. You see, before actually arriving in Mexico, Raiden is told to maintain a low profile and try his best to blend in. Which should be absolutely no problem considering he's only a shiny silvery cyborg ninja, now also toting around a semi-sentient robot wolf dog thing. No one would ever take a second glance at something like that, would they? It's okay though, because Raiden knows exactly what to do. Put on the most insensitive and stereotypically offensive mariachi-like outfit possible, and oh, make sure it in no way hides or covers you in any meaningful way whatsoever. Also, make sure to top all of that off by immediately letting some locals see you enter the sewers upon your arrival as you give them a chummy greeting. I'm sure that won't make you stand out at all. Fine, I know this is just supposed to be a quick gag or whatever, but piss off! No, really, piss right off if you even attempt to defend this scene, as it is absolutely indefensible. It's not funny, it makes absolutely no sense, and worst of all, it makes Raiden look like a complete and utter prick, and a fairly racist one at that. Honestly, this one scene alone absolutely demolishes any semblance of growth or dignity this character ever had, and reduces him to nothing but a cheap, vacuous non-joke. It's just so offensive on so many levels that I don't believe for a single second that it wasn't absolutely intentional, and those responsible can all kiss the flabbiest part of my pasty zit-covered bum cheeks. By the way, if you feel like I've been skipping over most of the story or not gone into much detail, you're not exactly wrong, but that is pretty much how the game itself portrays these events. It's all a fairly disjointed and incoherent mess, and the actually important stuff like motivations, backstories, or plot and character developments are all pretty much left up to the player to just guess. Seriously, all we're really told about the bad guys are just that they're bad guys, and I really couldn't tell you thing one of value about any of your companions. They're all just there because, and who cares what anyone's actually planning or why, that's just something those stupid thinky types care about. Now go enjoy all that fancy slicing and cutting and stop using that annoying brain so much. Fine, I'm being a bit unfair, but it does kind of feel like that's what they're saying here, that the story and characters don't really matter, it's all about the gameplay. To an extent, I do agree with that. After all, if the game is unplayable, you can have the greatest story in the world and it wouldn't matter. But this game is still trying to have a story of sorts, and oh yeah, it's supposed to be a canonical entry in an already established and massively popular franchise full of great storylines and characters, one of which is your bloody protagonist, so yeah, you could at least try to give a crap. I mean, take my initial point about the storyline itself, that it's just wrong for Raiden to return to the battlefield given his character arc in MGS4. If there was at least some sort of attempt to explain how or why he ends up doing so after all, it might be a bit more forgivable, but no, we get nothing! It's not even like Rose or Raiden's son is killed or kidnapped or something, they apparently haven't even split up!
And your wife and son? What of them?
They're in New Zealand. Safe. Rose would understand why I have to do this.
Yeah, they're still together, which must mean Rose was actually fine with Raiden going back into battle? Are you kidding me? How is it possible to barely add any story of your own and yet ruin almost everything that was already established at the same time? Seriously, it's almost impressive to screw something up this badly. Well, I say they screwed up, but I haven't really talked about the gameplay, have I? It is possible that the gameplay is good enough to excuse at least some of the game's other foibles, though it would have to be absolutely sensational to completely wipe the slate clean as far as I'm concerned. In any case, as you've probably already seen and guessed, this isn't quite the same type of game as other Metal Gear titles. In fact, it all but completely forgoes one of the core elements this whole franchise was built on, stealth. Yeah, there are a couple of sections with some stealth-like elements, but no, that's not really what this one is about. This time, it's all about fast-paced slicing and dicing action. I suppose this does make at least some sense considering Raiden is a blade-wielding cyborg ninja after all, but then again, I'm fairly certain ninjas are also supposed to be somewhat stealthy. Hell, just look at Raiden's previous appearance. Sure, he kicked all sorts of ass and had some pretty spectacular action-y fight sequences, but he also stuck to the shadows quite a bit, and he even taught Snake about using his environment to conceal his movements or track those of others. He actually was kind of a ninja. This time around though, he's not so much a ninja, but more of a super swordsman or some such. There aren't really any slower paced moments focusing on sneaking around or tracking anyone or the like. It's all about quite literally slicing through your enemies as quickly and effectively as possible, and you know what? It actually is kind of fun. Yeah, I won't lie, the cutting mechanics in this game are pretty impressive and quite satisfying indeed, as you can actually slice through just about anything. You can even activate a so-called blade mode in order to slow down time and increase your accuracy, allowing you to either slice up enemy combatants and vehicles more precisely and or in more pieces, or utilize the so-called Sandatsu feature. You see, the enemies in this game aren't just average humans, they're mostly cyborgs like Raiden or various forms of robots, which means they're actually a great way to gain resources. How? Well, all you have to do is enter blade mode and activate the aforementioned Sandatsu, and you'll literally rip out their guts and feed on their innards. You know, typical hero stuff. Alright, I know, it's just a cool mechanic, and you're right, it is fun in practice, regardless of how much sense it may or may not make. But let's be real, it is fairly gruesome, even if they are just cyborgs or whatnot. Either way, all this slicing and dicing action is, as stated, pretty damn fun, at least for the most part, but it's not exactly perfect. For one thing, it's not always quite as precise as you'd want, and for another, it is kind of hectic. Even at the best of times, it's relatively easy to get overwhelmed, and your defensive measures are not really all that helpful. Sure, you have a lock-on feature, but it's fairly ineffectual and wonky, and your parry/counter system has to be timed so precisely and accurately that it's barely worth using most of the time, meaning you'll barely even remember it exists eventually. Honestly, I don't think I really used it outside of this one fight that kinda makes it mandatory, but we'll get to that. You don't necessarily just have to use your blade though, as you do get access to a few other secondary weapons, but much like the parry system, they're fairly downplayed. Oh, they can be useful, and I definitely utilize them at times, but they're not all that interesting, and they're certainly not any more effective than just sticking to your blade, at least not in my experience. In addition to that, the gameplay also just gets kinda grating after a while. Maybe it's just me, and I know you can just take a break once in a while, but you're still going to be doing pretty much the exact same thing you were doing before the break when you come back. No, it's not that it's bad per se, but it's just not that engaging, at least not in the long run. Not that you'll really get to enjoy the game for that long, even if you wanted to though. You see, this is actually a pretty short game, and I mean really short. Sure, you can eke out a bit more time from it if you decide to do all the pointless optional stuff, like the VR challenges or getting all S rankings and such, but most will struggle to make this game last for more than an evening or two, if that. Now, I certainly don't need all my games to be 100-hour plus experiences, but come on, this is still pretty weak. Apart from that, I don't really have much more to say about the gameplay. All the stuff I could talk about, I suppose, but it just seems kind of pointless as there really isn't that much more to it. This is not a very complex game. No, it's not really trying to be one either, but as good as the mechanics here may or may not be, I ultimately just find it all to be pretty shallow and superficial. It can be pretty enjoyable, sure, but not for that long, and certainly not enough to make up for the rest of the experience. Speaking of which, Raiden was just about to enter the sewer level, wasn't he? You see, there's apparently some lab that's reportedly been performing some illegal human experiments and dumping something in said sewers, which is why Raiden now finds himself ankle deep in wastewater. Or maybe his superiors just don't like him, I don't know. Either way, Raiden eventually almost literally runs into a young boy named George being chased by a bunch of robots. Raiden tells him to run away, but he decides to stay and make Easter eggs instead.
A ninja! Cowabunga! Go ninja! Go ninja! Go!
I do not understand.
I do.
I understood that reference.
Anyway, after that, Raiden dispatches the robots as George watches on, and in an effort to repay him, I guess, George tells him what's actually going on at that shady lab. It seems they are actually dealing in human trafficking of poor, young, homeless and orphan children in order to harvest their organs. In particular, they're interested in using their brains for some sort of cyborg experimentation. While George apparently managed to escape, he informs Raiden that there are still several kids being held prisoner, so Raiden makes his way there post-haste. Once he arrives though, he stumbles upon... oh hell, I can't do it justice, just take a look.
You serious?
I mean, really? You really want us to take this seriously? This? You have got to be taking all the possible piss. Yeah, I know, it's so horrific. All of those brains harvested from all those poor, innocent children. And put on display in some weird metallic casings complete with fully functioning googly eyes for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Ooh, scary! I haven't been this terrified since the last time I watched the Muppets! Ah, they're so wholesome! It doesn't stop there though, as Raiden also finds some sort of surveillance footage that reveals that the group from his other missions, apparently named Desperado, are definitely involved this time as well, and so is the US government, or at least one of their senators named Armstrong. Before he can do much about that though, Raiden first tracks down and rescues the remaining kids, but it seems the professor or doctor or whatever he is who is in charge of this place has managed to recapture George. Why wasn't George off somewhere safe? Because then this couldn't happen.
Nasty.
It's okay though, as getting sliced open like a tuna is apparently just like getting a paper cut in this universe. A relatively big paper cut, sure, but George still seems remarkably fine pretty much immediately afterwards. What's that? You think they might actually have intended to kill him and then pussed out at the last second? What could possibly have given you that idea? Whatever, the point is that George and the other kids are finally safe, but as Raiden discovers, there are quite a few more that may not be so lucky. It turns out that Senator Armstrong is indeed involved with this whole brain harvesting operation, as some company named World Marshal, supposedly owned by him, is actually buying up and using said brains for their new cyborg combatants. At least, I think that's what they're doing, but it's honestly a little confusing and really poorly explained. Either way, Raiden's not exactly a fan of this whole thing, so he decides to make this company his next target. Unfortunately, they're apparently not technically doing anything illegal, as their use of these brains is somehow perfectly acceptable. What?
Are you nuts?
In what pea-brained universe would this possibly be acceptable? No, World Marshal aren't the ones actually butchering and harvesting these kids' brains, but come on! They're still using illegally harvested children's brains! I think most people would probably view that as at least a tiny bit problematic, you thought clouds! Why even make this a thing in the first place? There's absolutely no reason this couldn't just have been an illegal operation through and through. Just say this was all a top-secret project only known to a select few or some such, and there you go, no issues. Okay, so it might not be the most unique idea or whatever, but it would at least be somewhat rational and make some semblance of logical sense. This really shouldn't be this stupidly complicated. According to Raiden's team, though, it seems that really is the case here. This company is not breaking any laws, and as such, Maverick have no authority to go after them. Raiden actually seems to still have a bit of a brain though, so he just says to hell with it, quits his job and goes after this company on his own. All of which is ultimately rendered absolutely pointless considering his team still decides to back him up, just not officially.
What in the hell was the point of that?
Anyway, it seems the authorities near World Marshal's location somehow knew Raiden was coming, as they're out in full force trying to prevent him from reaching the actual headquarters. How or why they're actually involved at all is honestly beyond me though, but maybe I missed something. They're really only there as an excuse to have one more slice of action as far as I can work out though, but again, what do I know? It certainly doesn't take Raiden that long to make it through these forces anyway, as he eventually finds himself confronted by Jetstream Sam, taunting him via a bunch of monitors. Essentially, he calls Raiden a hypocrite for going after a group of supposed killers, when he has no problem completely eviscerating hordes of their goons in the process. This is actually a somewhat decent point, but not to worry, Raiden has a flawless counter-argument. You see, those goons aren't actually people, they're just cyborgs that all knew what they signed up for when they joined Marshall or Desperado or whatever. I mean, it's not like they're anything like him and have actual human brains, hearts, or emotion or anything, they're just cyborgs. You know, like him. Yeah, I don't think you actually thought this one all the way through there, right? As if to emphasize just how much he didn't think this through, Sam somehow hacks Raiden's systems or some such, and forces him to hear everything the aforementioned goons are actually thinking and feeling, and it turns out that, shockingly, they're actually terrified of the psycho ninja slicing them all into cold cuts. Shock and gasp! What an incredible twist! For those with no cognitive faculties whatsoever, this does somehow throw Raiden completely off guard though, causing him to end up in a less than ideal state by the time he actually makes it to the Marshal headquarters. As a result, he gets beaten down quite easily, especially once Monsoon, another of the Desperado elite, shows up. He essentially continues Sam's accusations that Raiden's nothing but a killer himself, which he initially denies, but as his body starts to give up, so it seems does his mind.
You're right. About me, I mean. The bit about my sword. That means of justice stuff. I guess I needed something to keep the Ripper in check when I was knee-deep in bodies. But you... all this is a wake-up call to what I really believe. What I really am.
What are you saying?
I'm saying Jack is back.
What's this shit, Harry? C'est de la merde.
Yeah, let's be real, that monologue is on a whole other level of cringe. How could you possibly read a line like that out loud without bursting into laughter? It's just so bad! Honestly, kudos to the actor for keeping a straight face, because wow! What makes it even worse though is the fact that this might actually be one of the better lines in the game. I'm serious, the dialogue in this mess is absolutely atrocious, and you should count yourself lucky that I haven't subjected you to any more of it than I have. Still doubt me? Well, don't say I didn't warn you.
My sword is a tool of justice.
Who saves the weak from the man who saves the weak?
What's the meaning of life? Why are we here?
I am here to kill you. I think it's time for Jack to let her rip. I was wrong.
You're not greedy. You're batshit insane!
Okay, we get the point. They're kids, you son of a bitch.
And kids are cruel.
You took back your life!
And now, I'll take yours. I said my sword was a tool of justice. Not used in anger. Not used for vengeance. But now I'm not so sure. And besides, this isn't my sword.
Shut the hell up!
Either way, this epic line is essentially meant to convey Raiden finally embracing his inner psycho killer, as he not only starts laughing maniacally at getting stabbed through the abdomen, but he even has a team scientist slash medical expert, conveniently just named Doctor, turn off his pain inhibitors because, he fights for the pain. Hey, I'm just quoting the game, alright? What this actually means, though, is that we now get access to the so-called Ripper mode, which honestly doesn't really amount to much. Not only do we only get to use this in the final stretches of the game, but it's not really anything more than a boost mode of sorts. If Raiden's energy levels are full, he can activate this in order to do more damage and move more quickly, but it also drains his energy faster, meaning it can't be used for that long. In other words, nothing too useful. I will say though, that while this is a fairly nothing addition in and of itself, it still pisses me off quite a bit. Not from a gameplay perspective, but from a character and story perspective. I know I keep harping on about this, but holy character assassination, Batman! This just completely destroys any and all growth Raiden might have had. Yeah, the whole mariachi outfit thing was pretty bad, but this officially makes his entire character arc null and void. Everything he went through, all the physical and mental anguish he had to endure to get to a point where he could finally and truly let go of his past and move on to live a peaceful and happy life with his family, is just completely thrown away. And for what? A vacuous and shallow attempt at making him more badass and cool. Go kiss an electrical outlet, you disrespectful, condescending, miserable little taint scratchers! In any case, now that Jack is back, Raiden decides to let her rip, as he relatively easily dispatches Monsoon before going after the two last Desperado elites. Well, I say easily, but this fight can potentially be a teeny bit more trickier than the others, as this is that one fight I mentioned where the parrying becomes all but mandatory. It's not that big of a deal, no, but if you fail to utilize this mechanic properly here, I'm fairly certain it'll actually be impossible to move on. Even I managed to get through this without too much trouble though, so it shouldn't take too long before Raiden is face to face with Sundowner once again. Before they actually fight though, Sundowner obviously has to have his big villain speech moment where he tries to convince Raiden that his actions are pointless. After all, Desperado and or Marshall have way more brains at their disposal than he realizes, and Sundowner claims that the demand for them will still be high even if they themselves aren't there to deliver. Raiden doesn't really take his words too seriously though, and honestly, who could blame him? I mean, the whole thing with him showing off all these brains and creepily caressing them and whatnot is supposed to be intimidating, sure, but it just comes across as silly. Really, really silly. In fact, I wouldn't blame Raiden if he actually started laughing in Sundowner's face. Either way, Raiden eventually brings Sundowner down, but in the process he also learns that Desperado apparently have something big planned that will ensure the continued propagation of the so-called war economy. How? By starting a new, massive war. Somehow. Yeah, it's not really explained exactly what their plan is or how this all would work, but Raiden is told that it will all be taking place within the next 3 hours. Sundowner doesn't reveal where this will happen though, but he claims that it will be impossible for Raiden to get there in time to stop them, even if he were to travel at Mach 2. Gee, I wonder if that is some kind of hint. Well, what do you know? It was a hint. Kind of. You see, by doing some sort of calculations based on stuff, Raiden and his team somehow managed to figure out that whatever Desperado is doing has to take place in Pakistan, as there's apparently going to be some sort of presidential visit there or something like that. I honestly couldn't care less at this point. It does seem that Sundowner was right about one thing though. Raiden can't possibly get to Pakistan in time, at least not without a little help from none other than Sunny. You know, Sunny, the little girl Raiden saved from the Patriots and that Snake and Otacon seemingly adopted in MGS4? Yeah, she's some sort of reclusive super genius engineer type now, because I guess she ended up not enjoying being outside all that much after all. Anyway, it seems Sonny has some new type of spaceship that should be able to get Raiden to Pakistan with time to spare, but he has to rush over to her research/development base named Solace first. As such, he and Doctor head there in a helicopter, but unfortunately they are intercepted and attacked by some unmanned AI attack planes before getting too far. In the ensuing ruckus, Raiden is even ejected from the helicopter as he's forced to make it the rest of the way on foot after all. Making the helicopter kind of a pointless addition, but whatever. Raiden does manage to find and commandeer a motorcycle before too long though, but as he begins nearing Sonny's base, he is once again confronted by Jetstream Sam. Deciding to end this once and for all, they agree to battle it out in a duel, actually more reminiscent of a samurai battle than a ninja fight, but whatever. Predictably though, Raiden eventually emerges victorious and makes his way to Sonny. Well, after this oh so lovely exchange.
Are you, Mr. Raiden, sir?
You are made of stupid.
Anyway, after a quick hey how are you and goodbye, Sonny promptly packs Raiden off to Pakistan by way of outer space, because why not? Upon arriving at some Pakistani airbase though, Raiden doesn't really see anything out of the ordinary, but decides to head to and disable a nearby control tower anyway, as this will apparently cause the incoming presidential jet to steer clear. Before he can actually put this plan into action though, some giant ant-shaped Metal Gear suddenly bursts out of the ground as Senator Armstrong steps out of it to confront Raiden. Okay, a few questions here. Why an ant-shaped Metal Gear? Is that really all that useful? Even if it is, why was Armstrong seemingly waiting for Raiden underground? As far as I can tell, there weren't any other reasons for him to emerge like that, so why bury yourself like that? Yeah, sure, it's a feature of your machine, but still, kind of a pointless and unnecessarily complicated way to ambush your enemy, don't you think? It's not like he even does that good of a job at ambushing Raiden anyway, as he could have just crushed him under the weight of this thing immediately, but no, we have to have our big villain speech first, don't we? This doesn't really amount to much more than a rather pathetic macho pissing contest between him and Raiden though, as Armstrong eventually calls time, gets back into his anti-gear, pun most certainly intended, and does his best to bury Raiden. Which again, he could have already accomplished if he just thought things through, but whatever. Even with the help of his big, fancy killing machine though, Armstrong can't seem to put an end to Raiden's meddling, but he's not about to give up that easily. You see, Raiden has managed to make Armstrong rather angry, and apparently, we wouldn't like him when he's angry.
Let's go!
Yep, you're seeing this right. The final boss, the ultimate big bad of this game, and technically of this entire franchise going by the timeline, is nothing more or less than Senator Hulk. What? You... just... What? No, really, what can I possibly say to this? Is it even possible to accurately portray how utterly ridiculous and just downright stupid this is? You couldn't come up with anything else? Was there really no other direction you could have taken this? This has to be one of the worst, least satisfying anti-climaxes of any game franchise ever! Even Raiden can't believe you could possibly be this asinine.
Oh, you've gotta be kidding me!
It's not some sort of elaborate joke though. This really is the final boss, and wouldn't you know it, he's a pain in the nads to deal with as well. He takes way too much damage, you have to make pinpoint accurate attacks and parries at several points or do a crapload of work all over again, and of course he spams multiple, completely unblockable attacks as often as he possibly can. They really couldn't have made this a much worse final boss if they tried. Honestly, this guy kinda feels like some sort of cheat character or something, as he normally wouldn't stand a chance against Raiden, so what do? They make him all but impervious to attack. Literally. Yeah, it seems he's somehow not only able to Hulk out, but he can also absorb pretty much any damage done to him, as his skin hardens upon impact. Yeah, that's not a complete cop-out at all, is it? As this does make for a rather long-winded and drawn-out battle though, I suppose it does at least give Armstrong a chance to fully explain his grand plan, right? 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 Are you kidding me? You couldn't even give us that much? You can't possibly be this incompetent. This has to be deliberate. Okay, so Armstrong does try to explain his plan, kind of, but it doesn't really make any sense, and it barely connects, if at all, to any of the other plot points that have been established so far. In essence, he's just sick of not being able to be a true warmonger without any government interference or bureaucracy bullshit, so he's going to become president in order to allow everyone the freedom to start whatever war or conflict they want anytime they want. Because that's definitely how being president works. Even if any of that did make any sense though, where the hell do all those child brains and cyborg shenanigans come into play? Why did Armstrong need the Desperados to kill that African Prime Minister? Why did he make that one ant-shaped Metal Gear if he's not actually going to use it for anything of significance? What in the flying fig-Newtoning hell was the point or purpose of any of this? I honestly couldn't even begin to answer that, but as the game doesn't seem to be able to either, I guess it ultimately doesn't matter. What does matter is that while Raiden initially struggles quite a bit to take Armstrong down, even seeming on the verge of defeat at one point, he eventually manages to turn things around when Wolf suddenly shows up and throws him Jetstream Sam's sword. Exactly how or why this particular sword makes such a big difference, I don't know, but at this point I frankly don't give a damn. As Armstrong finally goes down for the count, it seems there are still a few minor issues to take care of, as images of Raiden killing Marshall employees somehow leaked out online and people are now demanding a retaliation. The news of Armstrong's death does somehow manage to calm things down a bit, but the US is apparently still sending a significant military contingent to Pakistan to, I don't know, keep the peace or some such. All in all though, things do seem to finally be over, as Maverick gets granted permission to rehabilitate, retrain and re-employ those child-brain cyborgs for non-military purposes, and Sonny makes use of and employs George, who apparently has a bit of a thing for her. As for Raiden, he apparently decides to go off on his own after all, in order to fight his own battles. If you couldn't already tell, this game is a massive mess, and I for one do not like it. I know it has quite a few fans, and even I will admit that the core gameplay definitely has its moments, but that is so far overshadowed by the rest of this nonsense that it's barely even worth mentioning. Yes, the game looks incredible, even by today's standards, and the music, while a bit obnoxious and blaring at times, is also pretty excellent, but almost everything else is either completely ridiculous or utterly offensive. The story makes little to no sense, none of the characters have any sort of personality or development, and the game is far too focused on making every second as awesome, cool, and over the top as possible. In addition to all of that, the stealth mechanics here are nothing but an afterthought and might as well have been left out entirely, and oh yeah, the Metal Gear is only an incidental inclusion at best. Yeah, the thing this entire franchise, and yes, even this game is named after, is about as prominent here as it was in the NES version of the original game. You know you've screwed the pooch when I can legitimately make that comparison. The best thing about this game is undoubtedly how short it is, as that thankfully means it's at least over before it has a chance to further sully the rest of the franchise. The same certainly can't be said about the next entry though, as that is far from a short experience. It is the final entry this franchise ever saw though, or rather the final two entries I should say. Too bad both of them were far too little, far too late.
Here's to you, Nicola and